Angel Psychic Cynthia Killian here, also known as Psychic Cynthia, and welcome. Welcome back to another one of my psychic education videos. And today actually we're going to be talking about astrology. As some of you may know, I'm preparing to teach my Astro Basics teleclasses in January, and this is just sort of a little primer for that. Of course, I'll be going into more depth for those students, but I wanted to talk about a elemental viewpoint of astrology today, and also just talk a bit about why it's important to know more about the different parts of your astrology chart, and not just your sun sign, even for somebody who's not an astrologer, even for somebody who doesn't want to be an astrologer. But if you're just a human being on this planet, if you want to have the experience of inner peace, of inner harmony is how I think of it, that perfect inner symmetry, then it's necessary to embrace all parts of yourself. For the self, it's like a garden, like the inside garden that I'm in. And there are many different components. You know, you have your geraniums and your bonsai and your hibiscus trees and your begonias and your succulents and your aloes and all the different plants, right? And they're all part of the garden. Well, you too, my friend, are a garden. Your interior self is an organism that consists of many other smaller organisms, many cells, you might say, the cells of the self. And you can think of it relating to the ancient saying, as above, so below, as without, so within. And you can also really see this model of self if you think about the solar system, and you think about the sun being at the center of the solar system, this massive star, and you think about the planets rotating around it, and then our planet that we live upon, the sacred Mother Earth. And doesn't each one of these heavenly bodies play a role in the solar system? I mean, what if even the moon, what if the moon, which is a satellite, I know, but what if it were knocked out of orbit? What would that do to the solar system? What would that do to life on Earth? Or what if we just ignored the moon? I mean, wouldn't the experience of life on Earth be much less rewarding and enriching? So in the same way, you have these different parts of yourself that are represented by the different points in the astrology chart and the different combinations of energies. And so you have your sun, which most people have heard of the sun in Western astrology. So, you know, that's where we say currently, you might say, I'm a Scorpio sun, I'm an Aquarius sun. You might say, I'm a Gemini sun, I'm a Capricorn, I'm a Taurus, I'm a Virgo, I'm a Sag, whatever, whichever one of the 12 you have. Incidentally, in other points in time, when in society, when a person might say, I'm a Virgo, or I'm a Leo, or I'm an Aries, they weren't always talking about the sun. Like, for example, in the Victorian era, they might have been talking about the sun. They might have been talking about the power sign, which would be your rising. Probably there were some ancient lunar societies where the sign that we identified with would be our moon sign. So, you really have more than one sign. That's what I'm saying. And I understand currently, we identify with the sun in our astrology, and that's important because that sun, that marvelous, big, beautiful, shimmering sphere in the sky, the source of life. I mean, of course, we want to know what signs are associated with that in our charts. So that is a good place to start, and don't let anybody tell you it's not. But then from there, you might want to branch out and look at your moon sign. That's so important, I find. Like you could have, let's say, somebody who was a Leo sun, bright, shining, radiant Leo sun, but maybe they have a Scorpio moon, the cooler, more intense, more secretive, more deep Scorpio. And so thinking about how that sun-moon combination works together, I mean, I think that's a really good place to start. You know, how do the two lights work together in the chart? And that's a term that you'll hear as astrologers use sometimes, the lights, right, for the sun and the moon. Even though technically other heavenly bodies could also be called lights because they do give us visible light, but the sun and the moon, they are the two main lights. So how do the two main lights of your soul, of your chart, how do they work together? Because it's very common to have your sun sign in one sign and your moon sign in a completely different sign. In fact, the only people that are going to have their sun and moon sign in the same sign are those who are born at or around the new moon. Did you know that? That's because that's when the sun and moon, two lights, conjoin together. But at all other times, there's going to be some distance, and that means there's going to be different signs. So you want to find out more about that, and you want to investigate that. And by the way, you don't technically even have to know your birth time to know your moon sign. It sort of depends on what rate the moon was moving on the day you were born and whether it changed signs or not. The moon has a variable speed of rate, but generally it changes signs at least every 72 hours, around about every 72 hours. But let's say, you know, what if you were born on a day when the moon didn't change signs? Then you can still know that's your moon sign. You won't know the degrees without the time, but you can still identify that sign and start to learn more about how that works together with your sun sign. Okay? And then you do have your rising sign, or it's also called the ascendant, which relates to where the sun was rising up over the eastern horizon there. So it's ascending. Okay. You know, you need to know your time of birth for that. You need to know it more precisely. And on the time of birth, I mean, there's different schools of thought on that. My own personal school of thought is that that time should be charted for the time of the first breath, which would be the first cry. You know, when the baby has that cry, that that is when the soul can more fully latch in. The spirit latches in to the physical incarnation. I'm not saying there isn't some connection up until that point. You know, that's debatable as to what extent. It's hard to know, but it has been observed throughout times. This is not just my belief. It is an ancient belief that with the first cry of the baby, the soul is locked in. Okay? So that's ideally, if you're expecting, okay, and you're going to have somebody record that birth date, have them record the time of the first cry, not necessarily the time the baby comes out, although usually it's going to be really close to the same. So listen, if you just have the time that you actually came out, that's good enough, okay? But if you don't have the time, okay, so you're, you know, not going to know the ascendant. Or what if you know the time but you don't know it precisely? Let's say you know it was between the hours of 2 and 3 on the day that you're born, PM. Then you might be able to kind of do some guesswork and at least figure out the sign, again, depending on what changes were going on and whether it changed signs or not during the time frame that you know. Generally, if you know a time frame within an hour, you can probably determine the rising sign, but not the degree. Okay? You need to be more precise than within the hour to get the degree. Much more precise, just you need to have the time. But even if you don't have the time precisely, don't let that stop you from investigating your chart, because the way some of these other planets and bodies move, I mean, you can still know with a relative degree of accuracy where they were at. I mean, like the sun only moves 1 degree a day, so you may not have it down to the exact minutes, the micro degrees, so to speak, but you can know the degree without even knowing the time, more or less. Now, if you're born on a cusp, you'll want to get the time, if at all possible, because you're going to need to know which side you fall on the side of that line. And cusps are a totally different topic altogether, and for another video or maybe just another lesson in the course, so we'll cover that another time. And cusp, that just means, in the sense I'm using it here to speak of the solar cusp, that means those of you who are born on the changeover between the two sun signs. And I know there's some of you out there, so we'll deal with that later. That's a little bit more advanced. So think about, these different parts of yourself, your sun, your moon, and your rising. And then beyond that, you have other parts of yourself. Venus represents, for example, the factors of beauty and attraction and relationships in your chart. What you value, what you are attracted to, and maybe even what you attract. For example, a Venus in Aquarius person is going to have a attraction to the avant-garde, the unusual, the cutting edge, the offbeat, and will also attract people who are unusual and a little bit strange. The Venus in Aquarius person may also enjoy astrology and value it because there's a link with Aquarius and astrology, for example. And that's very different than, say, the Venus in Virgo type, who is going to be attracted to discipline and perfectionism and maybe nutrition and intelligence and craftsmanship, skill building, for example. There's a lot more to Virgo than that, but that gives you an idea. So, you have these different planetary energies that are shown in the chart in these different signs. If you're new to astrology, and even if you're not, just as a review, most people don't have planets or points in all 12 signs. I mean, I don't even know if that's possible. It depends on, how many points you want to include. I mean, if you want to stick with the classical planets, or you want to stick, I should say, not just with the classical, but with sun and moon, which I know aren't planets, they're luminaries, but, they're part of the grouping of what we look at. Sun and moon and rising. Rising is a point. And then you have your Mercury, which is, in a nutshell, your thoughts and communications, your ability to communicate, your learning processes, and kind of too your ability to do errands and organize and things like that, thinking processes again, writing skills, tech skills, maybe that's Uranus too. So Mercury, Venus, the relationship factor, your relationship to relationships, how you relate to others, and also attraction, what you're into, your pleasure. I already talked about that. And then you have your Mars, which is your motivation, what drives you, not just what you're attracted to, but what really motivates and inspires you. For example, Mars in Taurus will be motivated by the desire to build something, to create something of lasting value, possibly be motivated by money, whereas Mars in Pisces will not be as motivated because, Pisces is more of an inner spiritual sign, so they'll be motivated by the realm of creativity and dreams, music, those kinds of things, for example. But Mars is your get up and go kind of thing, and how strong that is, what fuels that, etc. And then you have your Jupiter, which is getting further out there, but I find the Jupiter to be very important in the chart of spiritually conscious people, because it represents that path of earned blessings from past lifetimes, your luck that you've earned by your service in past lives, and also just a spiritual path, a spiritual calling, part of that for you. You have your Saturn, which many people fear that point in the chart because that is your point of discipline and mastery, and it doesn't necessarily mean you have that already. It shows where you will develop that in this lifetime, sometimes where you have it, but mostly it's where you're going to develop that. It's a karmic planet. Some people read Chiron. I certainly do. It is more of a planetoid or an asteroid. Not everybody reads that, but I do attach significance to that. And that is the wounded healer in the chart, the key to your self-healing, and also a multi-dimensional spiritual connection, ways of looking at your own spiritual discipleship. Okay. And then beyond that, you're also going to have the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And yes, I do still consider Pluto a planet. Most astrologers do. We could talk about whether it actually is, meets the criteria or not. I know the astronomers are divided on that. That's a very contentious issue as of the time I'm filming this video. But for the sake of astrology, we know that that definitely is a point in the chart that has a weight. The outer planets of Uranus and Pluto and Neptune are considered by many astrologers to have more of a generational effect, and they definitely do. But then if you're able to look at the interactions that these outer planets, the relationships are making with some more of the inner planets or the middle planets, you will see more of the personal meaning for you. So these are all different parts of yourself, and many of them are going to be in different signs. They're not necessarily going to be spread out across all 12 signs. It's not unusual to have a couple of different points or planets in the same sign. Some people have what's called a stellium. It's like you look at their chart wheel and it's like da-da-da-da-da. They've got 4, 5, 6, or 7 things in 1 or 2 signs real close together. So that's a concentration of energy, and we'll probably get into that more in the classes I'm going to have. But just imagine, though, I want you to think about it for a minute, how you have these different parts of yourself, and there are others that I didn't mention too, but these are some of the main ones. And you have all these different parts, and many of them are in different signs. And these different signs have different orientations. They represent different energies, different ways of looking at the world, different ways of moving through the world, different ways of being. And how are you going to get them all to work together? That is the message of this video right here, is by learning more about each of the signs that are in your chart. And by the way, all 12 signs are in your chart. I should just say that. They're all in the chart. They don't all have planets or points in them. But an astrology chart contains the whole zodiac, okay? So even if you don't have a planet in there or a point, you're going to have what's called a house represented by that sign. But the signs where you have birth points or planets are the signs where you have in this lifetime a concentration of energy. In other words, it's like where you have a cosmic family, cosmic DNA. And if you don't know about these different aspects of yourself, if you don't discover that some way, and I'm sure there's many ways we can discover different parts of ourselves. It just happens to be that astrology is a shortcut, actually. Even though it requires some study, you can get the answers relatively quickly. Just imagine if you studied your chart for 3 years versus how long would it take to come to that same awakening of all these different parts in therapy. Now, therapy's great, don't get me wrong. It's definitely great for some situations. But if you want to discover all these different parts of yourself, you might want to, say, combine your understanding of your own astrology chart with therapy, okay? For example. So think about that. Think about, as you're beginning on this journey of investigating your chart or going deeper in it, think about how you want to understand these different selves within the larger self, and you want to get them on board. If you have, a Scorpio sun with a Leo moon, how are you going to get Scorpio and Leo to work together? Where in your life, in what situations would it be better to move and act as a Scorpio versus in some other situations it would be better to move and act as a Leo? Same thing, say if you have Aquarius and Virgo. Those are very different signs. Or let's say you have, Cancer in Leo or Cancer in Gemini. Wow, those are very different signs. And by the way, you're going to have way more than 2 signs, okay? If you don't know that already. Every chart I've ever looked at has points in more than 2 signs. Now, some charts I have looked at have most of the points in 2 signs, and then only a few other signs, or only a couple of other signs, points in a couple of other signs. But that's where the stelliums are. But a lot of us are going to have more than 2 signs active. So getting those family members within yourself to get along, so you can be on a team together. My God, no wonder people are having problems if, they've got these competing parts of themselves. And I say competing because sometimes they are competing. They have very different ideas about how to do things. And if you're not in tune with that, dear one, you're just going to have so much inner conflict and fighting. You've got to figure this out. Whether you do it through astrology or whatever it is, you've got to figure out how you're going to get different parts of yourselves on more of the same page to work together. So anyway, that's part of why I'm putting on the Astro Basics classes, to give people more of an understanding of that. And really, if you're looking for a place to start, whether you study with me or not, I would suggest studying and learning all of the 12 signs first and what those meanings are. So then you can then understand where these points in your chart, what kind of energies they are moving through. Or at least study the signs where you personally have points. Okay? And one of the best ways to do that is to study them in elemental groups, which is what we'll be doing in the upcoming Astro Basics classes. So those are some independent study tips for those of you who are working on your own. I thank you all for tuning in. It's such an honor to have you here with me on our journey together. And until next time, bright cosmic blessings to you all.